Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Want to thank all of our attendees and particularly our panelists who are joining from all around the world. Karen Che, the founder and CEO of International Bridges to Judges, Juan Pablo Guerrero, a network director of the Global Initiative on Fiscal Transparency, and Mickey Kittleson, our professor at School of Politics and Global Studies at Arizona State University. Thanks so much for joining, Karen, Mickey, Juan Pablo. It's great to see you all.
Thank you.
Now, SDG 16, as we all recall, back in the run-up to the 2015 announcements of the 17 goals, was one of the two, perhaps, that was the perhaps most difficult to get accepted by member states alongside inequality. And yet, I think for many of us, and certainly given what's happened since then, and certainly over the last 6 months to a year, perhaps there's no more important goal to ensure that all the goals get achieved and we have a safe, healthy, and prosperous world and planet. So Karen, I want to start with you and really go around. And when you think about the first 5 years of the 2030 agenda, 2015 to 2020, and this very challenging year, with the pandemic, what's the progress we've made in SDG 16 more generally? What have been the major successes, if any, in your view? And what have been the major barriers in making progress on this incredibly important goal as part of the global goals? Karen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjeev. And it's great to be here with Juan Pablo and Mickey. And so you're actually saying, look at it as a whole for what happened before and including what's happened in most recent times, given COVID-19 as well as Black Lives Matter.
Yes, and all the things that are happening in the last 6 to 9 months, which has really seen our world convulsing, right? Virtually every country around the world.
I mean, it's interesting. I think just even as recently as January, I was speaking on a panel in Davos and they were talking about all the SDGs. And I was complaining bitterly that SDG 16 was really the stepchild, that everybody loves all of them. When we talk about the environment, ESG, we love everything. But in terms of SDG 16, which of course at International Bridges to Justice, we believe that SDG 16 underlies everything, that actually you can't do the rest successfully because it really rests on the rule of law being the bedrock of a stable society. So even back in January, I kept saying, hey, could we talk a little bit about the stepchild here? Because even if you look at the percentage of money that was being spent on SDG 16 and the focus, it was dismally small, and you could tell that it was a stepchild. I'm actually quite excited about the fact that in recent times, with what's happened with COVID-19 and with Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden, the criminalization of race and poverty has become, I think for the first time, somewhat people's hearts are open to it. People are really understanding that this isn't just about, there's a reason that we need to prioritize SDG 16, and we've seen a great development even in the last months.
That's good to hear. Juan Pablo, your view, sort of macro view on SDG 16, on the progress we've made, the challenges and opportunities since the pandemic in the last 6 to 9 months, a very difficult start of the decade of action, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, making me part of this very interesting and timely conversation. So I would also look at the issue as lights and darkness. On the one hand, there was, and I agree with Karen, very little progress. We had some countries trying to align their budgets into more inclusion and, for instance, integrating gender responsive budgeting, but there were really exceptions. One thing, and you will remember very well, Sanjeev, in which we had a tremendous progress is on what we know now. Before we used to say that transparency, budget transparency, fiscal transparency might help, and that citizen engagement might also help towards getting better results with public money. Now, we do have clear evidence that it works. And sometimes in the discussion with governments, it's not only good intentions, they want to see the evidence. So among others, thanks to your work, we now can make a very clear case that transparency and citizen engagement helps for better budget results. Another good trend regards a much more coherent consensus on big international partners and players on the need for more transparency in extractive industries, in open data, in infrastructure. Even the IMF member of the GIF network is not starting to work with supreme audit institutions for external control of the budget and civil society organizations. And the World Bank is mainstreaming public participation in public financial management. So there is a great consensus. And then I agree, after COVID-19, which is to become the worst humanitarian crisis since World War II, with tremendous impact on poverty and inequality, there has been a regain of the importance of social movements, mobilizations, and the absolute need to tackle these issues in order to get out of the crisis. So again, a tremendous crisis gives us amazing opportunities.
Thank you so much, Juan Pablo. I'm going to come to you, Mickey. As you know, at ASU, at Arizona State University, we pay very strong attention, and at the Thunderbird School of Global Management at the Politics and Global Studies Department that you're in, we pay very strong attention to building institutions locally, nationally, and around the world in many different areas. You have a tremendous expertise in many areas, but certainly when it comes to those institutions and gender justice and gender empowerment, how are we doing more broadly with SDG 16 in the world, and specifically now with respect to gender equality and gender justice, gender discrimination?
Yeah, so before I get to answering that, which the answer is going to be there's much work yet to be done, of course, I just wanted to quick say that I am a part of the SDG 5 working group at ASU, which is led by Amanda Ellis. And so we bring together, it's across ASU group, and we bring together people who work in the SDG 5 space for projects on global impact. And so we were really delighted to show the video today that talks about gender equality under the law, which is just so essential. That the connections to SDG 16 are complex and really key. And so this is a special year for gender equality and the empowerment of women. And so we wanted to make sure that we thank, as it's a multi-stakeholder project, to thank the World Bank, to thank the UN, the Interparliamentary Union, the Commonwealth of Women Parliamentarians, the IDLO, the Global Governance Forum. So anyway, we wanted to make sure we thank them. And so I think that a lot of the things in that video help make some of those connections. And so to kind of echo some of the things that have been said, first of all, transparency is going to be really key to addressing inequalities, right? And so there's all this cross-national evidence that demonstrates that climate change, state fragility, inequalities, there are these mutually reinforcing structures. And COVID-19, of course, disproportionately affects women and other more marginalized groups. And it just magnifies those existing inequalities, those existing security vulnerabilities. So what we need for that much work to be done is some long-term strategies for both equitable and sustainable solutions, and to grapple with multiple overlapping processes of marginalization. So to really effectively address these immediate and long-term crises, it's vital to ensure the full participation of marginalized groups, including women, in the decision-making at all levels, from the local to the international, to ensure that accountability, transparency for these inclusive and sustainable approaches.
Yeah, and would you agree largely with Karen's opening statement that SDG 16 was sort of the stepchild of the global goals world prior to the pandemic and all the upheavals, certainly Black Lives Matter, but many around the world. And now there's a renewed emphasis on and a commitment and a sort of energy behind SDG 16. You see the same thing from your vantage point?
Absolutely, yes, because we're starting to understand that institutional transformation is the key. We have to look at the institutions that structure the rules of the game. Yes.
Great. Karen, may I come back to you and let's do a deep dive into the work of IBJ. We saw the wonderful video where you sort of overviewed it, but still let's remind our wonderful participants and audience around the world, and part of what we're committed to at the Thunderbird School is to shining a light and working with great partners like IBJ to advance much more robust institutions that lead to justice. And so public defense, public defenders is not the immediate thing that comes to people's minds as a critical pillar of just institutions, and yet they are so central. Why are they so central, and how has IBJ tried to empower public defenders and to strengthen public defense systems around the world?
Great, thank you. I think that public defender systems don't look as critical until you see what happens when they're not there, right? And I myself was a public defender back in the early 90s, and then moved, to Cambodia, a number of countries, and then just really saw that when you do not have a public defender system in place, people every day are picked up, they're tortured, they're denied access to a lawyer, they get lost in the system. People are there for days, weeks, months, years without anyone even knowing that they're there. And so we realized that you could talk about everything very theoretically. And even when we started International Bridges of Justice, there were laws on the books, certainly in terms of international standards, as well as in countries throughout the world. But the biggest problem is that they weren't actually implemented. And to become implemented, you need more than the judge and the prosecutor and the prison. You actually need your defense, because your defense is, what will protect you and really keeps the eyes of protection on the system. So, when we look at it overall, for as much progress that we want to make in so many different areas, SDG 16 and human rights, the area of providing early access to lawyers in order to protect people, that's like the big, when that doesn't happen, it's like the biggest human rights violations hidden in plain sight, right? Where we can actually do something about it. But we don't if we don't really get down to the brass tactics.
So when you think about some of the successes IBJ's had over the years, that if scaled up could make a big difference, obviously for criminal justice systems and equality under the law, but more generally for SDG 16, what are those? What could be done to really, really make a huge difference in the areas of work of IBJ?
I mean, I think, what's been very exciting to us is that over the years, we started first in working in one country, and just in so many countries throughout the world, there is literally no public defender system, right? So you have people in jail, but then there's nobody there. There's no public defenders. But, if people don't have money, you only can get a lawyer if you have money. So we started, and we're working deeply now in almost a dozen countries where we have a program with public defense and judges, prosecutors, police. And then we also have very small programs in countries that have asked us for help in over 40. What we realize is that if there's a way that the world commits to really greater institutional support for working together with civil society, governments, and really utilizing the support of universities, like we're delighted to work with Thunderbird, universities and other people in the private sector, that we could actually create a stronger framework where we could ensure the fact that it's systematic early access to a lawyer, and it's a goal that we're all working towards as we put the resources and the commitment in.
It's phenomenal. Juan Pablo, can I jump over to you? Like, you start off by saying there's increasing consensus among the major players in the field of what's called fiscal transparency, participation, and accountability. Your leadership, the leadership of International Budget Partnership, and our wonderful colleagues, Warren Crosscheck and others, obviously increasingly, as you noted, the IMF, the World Bank, governments around the world. But take a step back for a second, Juan Pablo, for those who are first really just understanding what this means. What does this mean, fiscal transparency, participation and accountability, and why is it so critical?
Thank you, Sanjeev.
I think you're
Yes, we all have encountered problems with public services, not access to justice, to education, not having sometimes even the basic services that one would expect. And by the way, we all pay taxes, regardless of your income. When you buy something, you are paying in most of the countries a tax. So there is this contribution from your pocket to the government, and we don't get the public services that we deserve. So there always have been a very challenging question about how to better use public resources in order to retribute taxpayers with the public money, since this is people's money. So there are some responses, and some of our colleagues will talk about quite technical budget reforms. But now there is clarity that two conditions are crucial: transparency and citizen engagement. Now we know that if you want to fight poverty, you have to go down to the communities where poor people are, speak to them, address their specific needs, and actually design the policy according to those needs. And in the same country, you may have different approaches in different communities. So you have to take into consideration the users. And for many years, we've been asking governments to publish information about what they do without taking into consideration the users of that information. So it's not only transparency, as fiscal transparency is useless, is not used. You need to really engage the users. So that's one very important point in which we have been strongly working, as you know, making sure that there is a dialogue between the users of the information and the providers. And the second component, of course, is on citizen engagement. Sanjeev, colleagues, how many scandals we've seen in the COVID response regarding the bad use of public resources, about which we have only known thanks to the intervention of people getting sick, unfortunately, the people taking care of health services, people waiting for the students in schools, so on and so forth. So citizen engagement are crucial element to make sure that allocation is well established and that the execution of resources reach to their planned goals. So for people who don't understand why this is so important, I believe that they only have to think about two things. Budget is your money. This is public money. And in order to make it work better, we need better supervision and we need citizen engagement. You are muted, my dear friend.
Tell us about some exciting progress, successes, innovations that you've seen with the Global Initiative on Fiscal Transparency and more broadly in the field around the fiscal transparency, participation, and the SDGs. I'm sure our friends around the world would love to hear some of these great innovations.
Well, let me refer to a book that I come back very often about the political economy of fiscal operators.
I didn't pay him. This is fully transparent.
And that clearly establishes some triggers for a very important movement towards more transparency. And one of them is, unfortunately, but that's how it works, is a fiscal or financial crisis. That forces governments to see how vulnerable their position is and how much of an effort they need to make in order to overcome. And there we have seen countries such as Georgia in the Caucasus, the Philippines, Indonesia, or of course Senegal and Benin in Africa, trying to address the challenge of very scarce resources using fiscal transparency. And many of the ministries of finance tell you, I need line ministries to use money correctly, health, education, so on and so forth. I cannot make sure other than requesting for transparency and hoping that citizens will point at cases in which there are wrongdoings or misallocations. And there we've seen countries such as Mexico using much better the decentralization of education funds, thanks to a way of connecting, for instance, for renovation of schools, parents and teachers directly with the Ministry of Finance. We've seen the example of Brazil, 513 in citizens in, again, the design definition of the policy that is needed. And more recently, we've seen the use of tools, of technological tools to help connect ministries of finance in the planning of the main objectives of the budget and expressing citizens what are the objectives. And we've seen, for instance, in New Zealand, a new way of addressing the budget as a whole when we talk about well-being budgets.
It's phenomenal.
You might have lost me.
No, we're still there. We can hear you, Juan Pablo. We can hear you. There is a little bit of feedback, but we're working on it. So, Nikki, you've heard the great work of IBJ when it comes to access to justice and particularly public defense systems. Obviously, the work of GIF, the Global Initiative on Fiscal Transparency, when it comes to public budgeting and fiscal transparency and accountability, citizens being able to demand and hold their governments to account. Of course, all of these have a gender dimension, as we saw in the video and we heard in your opening comments. When it comes to truly advancing work in this field on gender, are there one or two or three key institutions that if we just don't get right, we're not going to really make much progress, that really are in some sense meta institutions or sort of catalytic for everything else to then not necessarily fall into place? It's not some kind of teleological necessity, but that is enabler for the rest to start to really move forward.
Yes. So first, I'd like to follow up, and I have learned so much already from the discussion, and to follow up on what Juan Pablo was saying about citizen engagement, and adding the point that we need the full range of citizen engagement, and that there are some institutions that are more power centralizing, right, more exclusionary, and there are other institutional configurations that they encourage power sharing. Yes. Right, and so I heard Juan Pablo mention decentralization. That's certainly one. The way the electoral rules are set up, are they proportional? Do they encourage multi-party systems? So there's a range of institutions that can sort of bring in more citizens, right? Engage the full range. In particular, you asked about to focus on one institution, and for me, at this time, it's been on the judiciary, because there's been a lot of talk when it comes to gender discrimination about the laws, which are often, quite hard fought for. But then adjudicating on those laws, they can be unraveled in the implementation. And so my focus globally has been on the highest courts, on apex courts around the world. And the higher we get in the structure, the fewer women we find on the bench. And so if there were one area to really look at, it would be, on having more women and other marginalized groups on these highest courts that adjudicate on these anti-discrimination pieces of legislation. So the laws and institutions that that advance gender justice and inequality, those are integral to the peaceful outcomes that we're talking about today, to our sustainable futures. And so that by high courts, I'm talking about the domestic, Supreme and constitutional courts, that they're really essential to advancing and protecting those rights. And women's inclusion on the bench of these high courts around the world is really key. So that if there were, one thing to say, that with those that with the power to select and appoint women to these high courts, that they do so in a full diversity, right, of women and other groups that have historically been marginalized and the intersection thereof. And so I've been working with some co-authors recently on a project where we built this comprehensive data set on the appointment of women and men to high courts around the world. And we analyze where and when and why some places have more women than others. And what we felt like is that a snapshot of just looking at one point in time, we could see some of the barriers, but if we have over time data, we can see what's driving change, what leads to improvement. And what we see is that women are being appointed to high courts in greater numbers in every region of the world. It's not just one particular region, right? In every region of the world, this is happening. And where a country has a neighbor country that's appointing more women or people from historically marginalized groups, there's kind of a contagion, right? And it shapes the idea.
Positive contagion.
Positive.
In this case.
Yes. That it shapes ideas about who can and should sit on those high courts, which leads to a greater integrity in the process, in the judicial process. Yeah.
That's fantastic. And it's, again, so critical. The judicial branch and high courts and having that type of representation and real inclusion has such transformative effects. Sharon, if I could come to you, obviously we're here at the UN Global Compact, part of the UNGA week. And so we have to talk about business and the private sector. And certainly as a dean of a global business and management school, this is of course something very close to our mission and goal in the world. Why is business and the private sector, or why should business and the private sector care about public defense systems? Why should they be engaged in a more active way? Because they can often say that's really not our business. That's not the business of business. Why and how can they be a force for change when it comes to the work of IBJ?
Great, and that's a great question, because it's exactly as we've been knocking on the door of many businesses over the last. We often get exactly that response, which is, why should we care? What does this have to do with us? And, in many of the businesses that have started to consider how they could work with us, the main thing is, I think they realize at the end of the day that, prisons are an area that people usually think we're separate from that. That's something sort of like the underbelly. We don't have to look at that. We can sort of keep ourselves away. And yet I think it was said by many people, including Winston Churchill and Dostoevsky, and who knows who quotes what, but they've always said you can measure society by going into the prisons and seeing, who's in the prisons and how people are treated. And at the end of the day, I do absolutely believe that's true, that is the measure of society. How do you treat the people that you supposedly cannot see, right? And we're super interconnected. And that's one thing that's been very interesting about COVID-19 is that we used, in the beginning, it was crazy. There were a lot of people dying in prison, obviously, not only from COVID-19, but just from sheer hunger in many of the countries that we work in. And some people were actually saying to me, but why should we care? Can't we just burn the bodies and they died? They could be prisoners. Why should people care? And I think people started remembering and realizing more and more, because we're all interconnected. So you can't just burn the bodies because it's part of a greater ecosystem, right? There are prison guards or people who are working there, and it's going to spread, and it's really an incubator. And I think this is just symbolic of the fact that everything is interconnected. We talk about the fact that the rule of law is really the bedrock of a stable society. It is. And it starts with, how we treat people, and that there's no way, they're inextricably related. If there's no access to justice, people are not happy. You don't just deny people rights, people get upset, but more than that, it affects everything. It affects, the trust factor. It affects, Juan Pablo was talking about it financially. When you can't trust a country, people don't want to invest. And so I think even from that perspective, businesses are like, okay, this is something which we can't ignore anymore. And I've been very excited because even, believe it or not, even in the last few weeks, we've had different types of people who normally talk to us to say, this is maybe an area that we care about. Justice does affect all of us. And there's actually, what's exciting about it is that there's so much that businesses can do. So we're excited to open that dialogue with them.
That's fantastic. Now, one of the areas you're really trying to advance is the notion of a justice bond. What would a justice bond even look like in those sort of conceptual terms? Of course, there's a lot of work to do to make it practical, but it seems so exciting. What does it mean?
I mean, I think that I was going to say, Sanjeev, that's for you to figure out with us. We're looking to Thunderbird to work with us on that, which we're very excited about. I mean, I think the main thing is this: at the end of the day, we obviously, our defenders have been amazing over the last 20 years and have done incredible work. And a lot of it is, case by case. In some of the countries we've seen literally the torture rate go down from almost 95% to less than 5%, purely by having the protection of a lawyer there. So we've seen some incredible wins in provinces, states, countries. And yet at the same time, it's not finished, and there's so much more to do. One of the things that needs to happen is that in terms of like the end goal, it's that the country takes it over, right? The country's able to embrace it, and it becomes not NGOs and civil society working together, but it's really, they have ownership over it. One of the realities of it is that all this great stuff, including the SDGs, are fantastic, but they're not going to happen, and 16 is not going to happen unless we have the financial resources really behind it to make it happen, right? And you could say what you could be critical and say, hey, but we've asked this country to do this, or we've only made this much progress or that much progress. Hey, we all want to make this much progress, and to make that happen, we need the financial resources. And so we're looking at different models, including putting together a justice bond, so that there is, as we know, enough money in this world to be able to solve these problems. And so by beginning the focus of a justice bond to make it happen, we feel that it's going to happen. So yes, Sanjeev, looking forward to Thunderbird.
Well, this leads right to you, Juan Pablo. There is enough money in the world. We often say in the field of fiscal accountability, it's not about resource mobilization, but resource allocation, right, my friend? That it's really about how we allocate these trillions of dollars. And certainly the response to the pandemic has shown that when the need and the imperative is there, resources can be mobilized, but how do they actually get allocated and implemented? Let me first, though, ask you to talk about the private sector and business. Since this is a panel associated with the UN Global Compact, the Compact has been advancing the role of business in achieving the SDGs and upholding 10 universal principles. What's the role of the private sector when it comes to government fiscal transparency, participation, and accountability?
Well, it's very important. On the one hand, the problem with having enough resources, but having them very concentrated in very few hands, which take us to tremendous inequality that has been even deeper after COVID-19, is that lessens the possibility, impairs growth. Now we absolutely know that if you want to have a growth that will stay and will be sustainable, you need to address inequality. And this is a very important evidence, which means that you cannot think that in one generation, countries such as mine, Mexico, Argentina, or many countries in Africa will have the funds to fight with issues such as poverty and marginalization if they do not address the inequality problem. That's one very important. And of course, there is an increasing role of the private sector in realizing this fact and in getting engaged in the discussion. The second element, dear colleagues, has to do with financing the future. We know that, and especially after COVID-19, many countries are going to be up to here with debt, and their fiscal space in a few years is going to be so little. So we know, and it's actually SDG 17, we're not talking about that, but I have to mention it.
Absolutely.
We know that countries need to start thinking about raising taxes seriously. Very few countries actually have enough capacity to raise enough taxes to sponsor not only the basic needs today, but future needs, talking about pensions, contingent liabilities, so on and so risks, climate change, so on and so forth. So those two elements, and I'll point out the third one in a second, put private sector at the center of the discussion. Corporate tax, so on and so forth. So if on the expenditure side, sometimes private sector is not as interested and enthusiastic about being part of the discussion about transparency, they are when we start talking about tax transparency. In those type of discussion, which, as you know, is the other side of the fiscal equation, we have spending, but in order to spend, we need revenues. And tax transparency is a very important topic that is picking up. And I can assure you that in a few years, we will have, and you remember this, Sanjeev, global principles on tax transparency. And to build that consensus, we absolutely need, and we know they're there, the private sector. Now, on the expenditure side, they have been also interested for at least two reasons. One is fairness of access to procurement. When there is no, for instance, transparency in open contracting, you know that there is much more of an opportunity for corruption. So many colleagues at the private sector are very interested into openness in procurement systems, so they have a better chance to have a fair treatment and a better chance to have access to public funds in procurement. And also, because of what was very well established by Karen, confidence. Transparency is very related to trust. And in order to invest, you need to trust a government. Now, there are for governments to gain the trust of their citizens. One of them is to be transparent.
Thank you so much, Juan Pablo. So the private sector and institutions that promote gender justice, gender equality, and gender non-discrimination, what's the role of Mickey?
The role of the private sector in general.
Yeah, the private sector and business. What can the private sector do? What should they do? What should global business and local business do? I saw this wonderful statistic. We often think, and we know around the world in many emerging markets and developing countries, the global south, that when you look at small and medium-sized enterprises, micro enterprises, the vast majority are run by women. But even in the United States, if you take all of the businesses run by women, small, medium size, not Fortune 500 or Fortune 100, where we see still such a glass ceiling, it's the fifth largest economy in the world. Just the women-owned companies in the United States. That's just a phenomenal thing to think about, that the financial and economic power of that. But more broadly, the question is, what is the role of business and private sector in creating institutions that really lead to gender justice and gender equality?
That's a really interesting question, and there's a large role to play. So we know, in thinking about the rule of law and inequality under that law, the key to creating that context is inclusion, right? And the rule of law is key to supporting business and to supporting economic growth. And so when we think about governance, sometimes we think of elected officials, or I've spoken about the judiciary, but corporations as well are key to this. And like you said, so it could be women-owned businesses or even large corporations in some cases have been leading the way. There are corporations around the world that have installed quotas for their corporate boards, which is one way of really, addressing the power issue, right? So they're leading the way with new practices. And so Juan Pablo had mentioned the well-being budgeting in New Zealand, and so I just wanted to raise that it's there's been a lot of news recently about this being done under Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, right? And a big deal has been made out of the fact that it's a woman, and for sure that plays some role. But I think it's a lot more complicated than that, and it involves institutions. So the very institutions that led to her election are the same institutions, the same factors that promote power sharing, that promote policies that support the collective welfare, cooperation, reduce inequality. These things are kind of like a web, right? And so I think there's a more complicated story there than just, it was a woman and it led to, this new process. I think more has been made out of a response to COVID, but it's this set of institutions that can lead to kind of a circle of mutually reinforcing factors that promote the collective good. Yes, and the role of civil society, I would say as well. You said, the private sector, bringing in the role of civil society. Not only women-owned businesses, but women are leading NGOs around the world as well, and that's been a real key in that the local that we started talking about at the beginning that was so important. That bridge between the local and the international is really I think the key to moving us forward.
Great. Well, we're running to the end of our session, so I want to give each of you one last question. You have been given a wand, and you have one or two wishes that will change the game in your field. How do you use your wand, Karen? What do you do that will change the game for public defense systems and justice around the world?
Okay, so listen, if I have a magic wand, I'm going to state my wish, and I hope that everybody who's here on the call joins us in this wish today, and that would be my wish. So I think that the central key for us is that what we've over the years is that it's about legal training, it's about public defenders, it's about judges, it's about prosecutors, it's about everything. And at the end of the day, there's something which is a different kind of secret sauce, which is that it's also about community. And when I look at what has happened over the years, like I said, country by country, region by region, it's been that there is something magical that happens when people come together and they're able to put together, be creative, and put together resources which we never thought was possible just by the ways that they built community together around a common vision and a common goal. As we've reached out and worked in all these different countries throughout the world, something very exciting happened to us during COVID-19, which is that COVID-19 happened and we couldn't see each other in person anymore. And we started having, a lot of global meetings, global calls with our defenders throughout the world, and exactly like this, and also started receiving different kinds of requests from governments. We signed our first MOU with the prison. Normally we have MOUs with the Ministry of Justice, with bar associations, but not prisons. But even, prisons started coming together with us. And what we would like to do, I think the magic wand for us is that we have elements of the digitization of the work. We've done in training for like 30,000 people in person, but then online, it's gone to like 106 countries by people putting it together digitally. And so our magic wand would be to be able to build a digital home for all of the components of our Justice Hub. So we could really bring the world community together, which is not just defenders, not just judges, not just ministries of justice, not just governments, not just technology companies. Actually, we want the technology companies to build it, to have this, technology home, so that we create a global community around this area of access to justice, and we all put in whatever resources we have to make it happen.
Wonderful. Juan Pablo.
So if you're on this call, please send that energy.
The wand is passed from Karen to you, my dear friend.
Thank you. One strike would be to put women in charge. We don't need more proof that they do much better in areas of authority, in responsibility, in managing resources. We still struggle to find a good number of ministries of finance who are women. There are some, for instance, in the, but too little. So that would be, and I hope that in the next decade this will happen. I see so much of not only a consensus, but a claim that this happens. That's my first wish. Address inequality. We will never get out of the set of holes we have been struggling with in the last 20 years if we don't start investing in the future, in basic education from the very early moment of childhood to health services. Look how vulnerable we were, even in rich countries, how inefficient systems were, and infrastructure, and of course, clean energy. So that would be, and the third, because you said one, but let me
quickly though, we have to get to Nikki. Okay.
Sorry, we've seen that in crisis, two conditions are crucial: a professional civil service and check and balance institutions. Even if we go into new fields, we also need to keep our mind in the very basics. The US, Brazil, and so many other countries have been able to continue moving forward thanks to a professional civil service and to checks and balances. Thank you.
All right, Nikki, you're last. The wand is yours. You get to wave it. What are the game changers that will lead to, incredible progress in the decade of action going forward?
I have agreed with so much that Karen and Juan Pablo have said, and I'd like to second the education. As an educator myself, I think that if I could wave a magic wand, I would have several things I would do. That would be one of them. Another would be a recognition that our institutions should reflect the populations that they serve. And specifically to appointing more women and other historically underrepresented groups to the highest courts, right, to address a lot of these laws. And also a shift in mindset from placing the onus on women to thinking about institutional transformation. So we hear a lot of solutions that are focused on more training or more women in the pipeline. And it's the institutions themselves that need the reform, right? So shifting that burden to how can we transform the institutions? Having shared ideas about who can and should be in positions of power. So the global norms that the UN has done so much to build, they really matter greatly for all of these things. Ideas matter would be, I think, what I'd like to conclude on.
Thank you so much, Mickey, Juan Pablo, Karen, to all of our participants from around the world. We at the Thunderbird School, the College of Global Futures at Arizona State University, are committed to inclusion, innovation, and impact at global scale. We are your partners and grateful and honored to be with you. Please stay safe and healthy. And thanks, everyone. God bless.
You too. Thank you so much.